Hey guys, so welcome to part 4, I believe, of chapter 22, where we're going to be looking into viruses of the lower respiratory system. Excuse me. And so, of course, I am definitely going to be talking about the present. I got something choking. Hold on. Okay, so I'm recovered. But yeah, I'm going to definitely talk about the present, like COVID-19, and going to that a little bit, even though your book doesn't talk about it, because obviously this just happened. This pandemic is just happening, and your book is written in I don't know when. So, excuse me. Let's start with the influenza flu. Okay, hopefully I've regained myself a little bit. All right, so the influenza, the flu virus, okay? So the flu virus, different from the coronavirus, even though they have very similar characteristics. And it's also different from the common cold, even though, again, very similar signs and symptoms. In fact, if you look at the signs and symptoms, you have congestion, malaise, headache, myalgia, dry cough, pharyngitis. But the way we distinguish the influenza flu virus from the common cold viruses and the common cold is because usually you have a fever that's associated with it. You have an onset of high fever with the with the flu. I think everyone has basically had the flu at one point in their life. And it is a very normal thing to have. It's obviously very it's not fun, right? You stay in bed, you can't really do anything, you feel like crap. It is absolutely not fun. However, most people recover well from it. In fact, you don't even have to go to the hospital to get treated for the flu. A lot of times you just stay at home and you just, through supportive treatment, etc., like fever medication or whatever, you start feeling better, right? Even though, by the way, aspirin is really bad for these kind of things, FYI. So yeah, don't use aspirin because it can bring about Reye's syndrome, which is a whole other story, which can also be fatal. Anyways, so I'm so sorry. I have something going on in my throat. And this is the second time I try to do this video, so I just want to power through. What was I saying? So it is they're very normal kind of signs and symptoms. And so when something like the influenza flu, when it comes out and a specific strain comes out and it's killing people by the millions, that's when things get really scary. It gets really scary because, again, it's just a flu. It's just the flu virus. It causes just the flu, right? And even though it causes just the flu, some people do die even annually. I think there's 40,000 people that died annually in the United States from the flu virus, I think, right? And in fact, a lot of people, once this COVID-19, which is another virus, guys, when COVID-19 first came about, everyone was like, oh, it's not that big of a deal. The flu virus kills more than COVID-19. Well, yes, the flu virus can kill annually 40,000 people, right, approximately. But coronavirus, COVID-19 right now, in the course of what is it, 4 months, 5 months? I'm gonna look up the statistics, hold on. I had it pulled up because I knew I was gonna be talking about this. Just in the US alone has killed 142,000 people. So not very good, not good at all. So it's difficult to compare the two because the COVID-19 is just so quickly passed on. And then the influenza flu virus, right? Under normal circumstances, it really doesn't cause that many problems or that much death, even though 40,000 people a year is pretty high, but it doesn't cause that much death. However, this is the big thing. However, there are specific strains that arise around every 10 years, around every decade, that cause complete mayhem. Like the H1N1 influenza virus that happened in 1918, right? So that happened in 1918, which basically wiped out half of the world. I believe 50 million people died worldwide. 50 million people died. It wasn't just infected. They weren't just infected. They actually died with it. So it can get really bad. You probably also heard of the bird flu, swine flu, all things that were initially really, really bad. I think bird flu was in 2003, I think. I don't remember. And then there was the Mexican epidemic in 2009. I don't know. I'm looking at my notes now. I wrote down the days because I don't remember the years very well. I'm very bad. But there's just been very major pandemics that have happened that are literally just the flu virus. Look up, yeah, the H1N1. Look up Spanish influenza flu. The really big kind of things that like wiped out like so many different, like so many populated like humans. And so it's just terrifying that something, because like in those kind of cases, people still had the flu. They still had these signs and symptoms. They didn't change. It's just that a lot more people became susceptible and the virus just gained a bigger advantage over the immune system, etc. And that caused people to die, right? And a lot of people actually got, because they were just, the viruses were so virulent, a lot of people had basically their epithelial cells, which is where the virus goes and attacks. Like the epithelial cells are your borderline cells, right? The epithelial cells in your lungs, where the virus goes in, attaches to them, and then it starts replicating them, and then it destroys them. And so slowly, it's breaking down that first defense layer of cells that you have. And so it makes it very easy for secondary opportunistic pathogens like bacteria to go ahead and actually infect you, and then they cause death. So that's where most of the deaths actually came from. A lot of them actually happened thanks to the hemophilia influenza. No, it's not hemophilia. Oh dear. H influenza. I forgot what the H stands for. That's bad. Hold on. There's just so many things going in my brain right now, especially the fact that I'm somehow choking. I don't know why. It's not hemophilia, it's hemophilus. Sorry. Hemophilus influenza. So that one is, which can happen naturally in your microbiome, that is associated very closely with the flu virus. And if you get the hemophilia influenza, as soon as you have the flu virus and you get the hemophilia influenza, which is actually a bacteria, I know it's called influenza, but it's actually a bacteria. It's called influenza just because of this crazy association with the influenza flu virus. Then you can die from it, because then you basically develop pneumonia, essentially, pneumococcal pneumonia and stuff like kind of similar to pneumococcal pneumonia. So, and that's where the majority of deaths come from. So it's basically the virus impairs you so much that you are now susceptible to other things, which is the same kind of theory as well with the coronavirus. So anyways, so what two pathogens actually cause the influenza virus, the influenza flu? This is the influenza virus type A and influenza virus type B. And both of these viruses are the strains of the specific viruses are named by the type of glycoproteins that they actually hold. So if you look at the influenza viruses, they are an RNA virus. RNA, it's actually single-strand RNA, and it's actually segmented. So instead of being one long strand of RNA that makes up the genome, it's nice and segmented. I think there's like 9 segments, but I'm not 100% sure. Okay. In addition, we have this envelope around the virus, part of the nucleocapsid. We have an additional envelope around the virus. And as you can see, we have these glycoproteins, these things that just kind of, these spikes, they're actually even called spikes, these spikes or these peplomers, another word for it, that stick out of the envelope. And specifically, we have the spike, the glycoprotein spike neuraminidase and the glycoprotein spike hemagglutinin. And these are 2 spikes that are very important for that contribute to the virulency of the virus. In fact, actually what neuraminidase does is that it basically breaks down, once the virus enters your lungs, let's say, it breaks down the protective mucous membrane of your lungs, the pleura. So it breaks it down, and therefore giving access to the virus to attach directly to the epithelial cells. How does it attach directly to the epithelial cells? With the hemagglutinin spike. There's also research that these particular glycoproteins are essential also for assembly of the virus, but that's something else. But essentially, these are what make the virus very good at attaching to your cell. And so if you mutate these, if there's different variations of these, they can attach to your cells, essentially, like kind of think about it, attaching to your epithelial cells better and better and better. Right, so the virus attaches to your epithelial cells, it inserts its RNA genomes, like its RNA genome inside its segmented RNA genome, forces you to replicate it, and then it forces you to excrete the virus. And then as that happens, your cell basically dies, right? All of these viruses that come out, your cell ends up dying. The actual human epithelial cell ends up dying. And it's basically, So that constant death of epithelial cells, that shedding of those borderline cells, right, allows for exposure to, your actual like deeper cells kind of thing, and then you have more problems. And that's where pathogenic other like bacterial opportunistic pathogens can hop into play, like Haemophilus influenza, and cause and cause death, right? So we actually, with this hemagglutinin and neuraminidase, the glycoproteins, they're so important that this is how we name our actual influenza virus. So you heard me say H1N1, H9N1, right? I think that was bird flu. These are because it's just a specific kind of glycoprotein spike that is used, that is found in that specific virus strain of whatever's causing, whatever disease it's causing, right? And it's crazy because with mutations, these spikes can change, hence the different strains of viruses like H1N1, H9N1, H7N1, etc. These mutations can occur to change the genes that actually encode the glycoprotein spikes. And these mutations can occur in two different ways. First one is antigenic drift, which is actually the nicest, in air quotes, of the two, and this can happen with both influenza A and influenza B. So influenza A or influenza B, just independent of each other. One of them can go ahead and infect your epithelial cells, right, or a cell. It doesn't have to be even yours. The thing about the flu viruses, they can jump a lot between like birds, pigs, and humans. So not necessarily just human cells. But then anyways, they enter their host cell and then they regurgitate their genome inside the host cell and force the host cell to replicate their genome, replicate their single-stranded RNA. Now with this replication process, it's not going to be perfect, right? It's not perfect in our own bodies. Our own bodies, when they replicate our DNA, we make mistakes. It's going to be the same thing for the virus, and especially since your DNA replication machinery is kind of going on overdrive here, because all they want to do is replicate more viruses, viral genome, and just make more viruses. So mutations are bound to occur. And so when a mutation happens on one of these RNA genome, like the RNA segments, a new strain can come about, and that's where we have a mutated strain, right, with new stuff. So this can bring about obviously problems because the virus is mutated, but we also have antigenic shift. Antigenic shift is, in my opinion, the absolute worst one. Kind of get rid of the F. You can see the letter, or not the letter, the word that comes about. You're basically full in crap, okay? And so because a completely new strain, not just a mutated strain, a completely new strain can come about from the antigenic shift. So with antigenic shift, which usually happens in things like birds or pigs, and it's horrible when it happens in them because they're actually asymptomatic. They don't feel and they don't have any symptoms, and they can spread it onto us no problem. And we look at a healthy bird, we're like, oh, this bird looks healthy. It's not going to cause me any problems if I touch it. I don't know why you would touch a bird. Anyways, I actually don't really like birds very much. Anyways, like I love them, they're pretty, but I don't really like touching them. Yeah. So what happens with antigenic shift is that both the influenza A virus and the influenza, the influenza B virus doesn't actually, it's not involved in antigenic shift. You have two influenza A viruses that come together, both of them, they come together and infect the same epithelial cell of like their host together. So what happens is both of them regurgitate their segmented RNA genome inside the cell, and the cell starts replicating them. And the thing is, like, say the red virus, like in this case, there's red and blue, right? So say the red influenza A virus gives its 10 segments, I don't know how many segments, it's 9 or 10 segments of RNA. And the blue virus also gives its other 10 segments of RNA. Once these get replicated, and then after they get replicated, they have to get put together. When they get reassembled, sometimes erroneously, right? Erroneously for us, actually, 5 segments of the replicated RNA genome from the the red type A virus get put together with 5 segments of the blue type A virus. And so now you have a mixture of those 2 viruses that came in. And so of course you're going to have a completely new influenza strain. And so, which can be very different from the original 2 strains of the viruses. And this is bad. And this usually happens about every 10 years. And this can really bring about like horrible consequences and, of extremely virulent influenza strains. So that's basically it. So a number of new strains have appeared in the last several years that have caused or have the potential to cause, I can't actually see this, but like influenza pandemics or things like that. Okay, so the pathogenesis, the epithelial cells lining the lungs endositize the virus. So they take in the virus replicates, the virus causes damage to the lung epithelium. And then this decreases the lungs' first line of defense. And because again, you're getting rid of those borderline epithelial cells, now you got rid of that defense, you now are more privy and more, you have a higher potential to getting and being susceptible to other actual infections, actual bacterial infections like Haemophilus influenza. And then that can cause death, right? Because it brings about, I don't know if I already mentioned it, it brings about similar symptoms to pneumococcal pneumonia. So the epidemiology, infection provides some immunological protection from similar strains. So if you were infected, if you had the flu virus one year, you're probably not going to get that same flu virus that same year, but just with the rate of mutational change that happens, the flu virus is going to mutate next year and then you can get it again. And this is actually really important when you think about vaccines. This is why the flu vaccine isn't always 100%, because what scientists do is they kind of predict the various mutations that are going to happen in the influenza virus and kind of adjust it so that the vaccine is going to be able to protect against those predicted mutations. But those predicted mutations may not even be part of the mutations that actually come about. So it's not 100%, but it is like a safety net, right? Yeah. This is like literally the only vaccine that I don't do. Not because I don't, honestly, it's because of pure laziness, because you have to do it every year. But yeah, anyways. So concerning that changes in type A influenza virus may cause another major pandemic. So there's obviously concerns that another major pandemic can happen, like I said, the H1N1 or the Spanish influenza or like the bird flu or whatever. And in these kind of pandemics, like when we had the bird flu, right? How did we get rid of it? Because it was very confined to like Asia, very confined to like China, because that's where it originated from. It was very confined there. How did the government and everything get rid of it? Basically resorting back to traditional methods, isolation and quarantining. That's it. Because there really isn't any kind of treatment for it. Like there's not really. So it says here, oseltamivir and zanamivir, different antivirals are administered, but they don't work 100%. They don't really work. Antiviral drugs are very iffy. Okay, so signs and symptoms during community-wide outbreak are often diagnostic. Treatment involves supportive care to relieve symptoms. You can have antiviral drugs to hopefully kind of minimize the time that you have the actual flu, but they don't really work all the time. It's prevented by immunization with the multivalent vaccine. The multivalent vaccine just means like you have a vaccine that's considering lots of different kinds of possible mutations, so many types of influenza viruses, strains, even though they may not even have been in existence yet. This is 70% effective because sometimes scientists they don't predict the correct ones. And of course, good personal hygiene and antisepsis. Moving on to coronavirus respiratory syndromes. And so here, this should be very familiar to you guys because a related coronavirus respiratory syndrome is basically the pandemic that we have happening right now, the COVID-19. This is where it falls. And so the actual past coronavirus respiratory syndromes that we've had have come about thanks to SARS. You guys remember SARS? Everyone was going around in little masks, right? And like especially China and in Asia and everything. And then the Middle East respiratory syndrome, which wasn't really well known too much because it was localized. It stayed pretty much in the Middle East because the reservoir for this this particular virus, was in camels. And so it basically stayed there, even though MERS is actually a lot more fatal than SARS. SARS was not as, most people could recover. So signs and symptoms, they manifest as a high fever, labored breathing, malaise, body aches, and may progress to pneumonia with dry cough. The virus can enter the blood and spread to the heart and kidneys. This is caused by the coronaviruses. So this is just a general group, right, called the coronaviruses, right? And what distinguishes them is that they are they have an envelope and they kind of this protein layer next around it that kind of forms this corona or this crown. It looks like a crown. Usually the diseases are mild, and this is actually second most common to common colds. Like it is very common. And so again, fatalities of SARS and MERS are particularly alarming, but SARS and MERS fatalities do happen. I don't remember the statistics. I don't know if I have them written down here anywhere, but maybe I do. Hold on. Oh, there we go. 10% with SARS, like people with SARS died, and then with MERS, you had a higher fatality rate of about 55%. Okay, so I mean, they give you very general kind of symptoms, but they're scary, just like the influenza virus, because they can be fatal. So the coronaviruses, they enter the body, we all know this very well, via the respiratory droplets, and they adhere to lung cells. And this is exactly what COVID-19 does. In fact, COVID-19 is also known as, I'm going to write it out here, SARS-CoV-2, right? It's just it's very similar to SARS. And like in the vaccines that they are trying to develop now, some of them are looking at like some vaccines that were already made for the SARS, just to tweak it to make it go against the coronavirus, like this COVID. I'm going to stop calling it coronavirus because all of these are coronaviruses. This COVID-19. Anyways, so how they work is that they destroy the lung cells, triggering respiratory symptoms, and they can spread via the bloodstream to the heart and kidneys. Yeah, in 2003, oh, here we go, statistics. Okay, 2003, 774 people died from SARS worldwide, but that rapid identification and worldwide response brought the epidemic under control in 6 months. How did we control it? Simple techniques, centuries-old methods, isolation and quarantine, which I know not a lot of people like, but unfortunately, with such a contagious virus, this is what you have to do. MERS has not been contained as easily. It was first noted in the spring of 2013. Camels were the reservoirs, and it was very prevalent in the Middle East and South Korea, but didn't really spread too far. It went a little bit into Europe, but it never spread, I don't think, to like the US. And this is the fatality rate. So it's diagnosed by signs and symptoms, especially in patients in endemic areas. Treatments are basically supportive. There's no antiviral drug that like can help. Prevention, they're currently developing vaccines against SARS. And so again, those vaccines that were being developed against SARS are being, some of them in some companies are tweaking to make a vaccine for COVID-19. And then they developed a MERS vaccine against camels. So, okay, so this is where, so I've talked about MERS and SARS, right? But now I'm going to talk a little bit about the coronavirus, like not the coronavirus. Everyone calls it the coronavirus, but the coronavirus, remember, is just a family group of viruses in which COVID-19 is part of. So I'm going to try to say COVID-19. So how does COVID-19 work, right? COVID-19, as of July 18, 2020, that's when I'm recording this. I'm going to look it up online, how many people have been infected. I actually had this already pulled up because I knew I was going to talk about this. 14,000, oh, that's not the correct comma, 14,249,000 people have been infected. Of those, there's been 600,000 deaths and more than 8 million recovered, which is amazing, right? Which is great. And this is because the the COVID-19 is something that like usually your immune system can regulate after a while. But it starts off basically like any other kind of coronavirus where it attacks the lining of your epithelial cells in your lungs. It actually can go to your lungs, it goes to your digestive system, like it can go to your spleen and your digestive system as well. And I believe other places, like your intestines, digestive system, your intestines and your spleen as well. And there's more and more research happening because it's just been really, really bad. So this particular virus, if it goes to your lungs, let's say it goes to your lungs, it starts infecting your lungs, forcing your lungs to replicate itself, right? And so as it replicates COVID-19 replicates in your lungs, it's going to kill off all the, like your actual epithelial cells, right? The other thing that this COVID-19 does is that as it kills off your cells, it actually causes and instigates a cytokine storm, which is essentially basically the virus yelling bloody, not yelling bloody, like causing your immune system to yell bloody murder. Okay, so your immune system goes on full alert, yelling bloody murder, it's going to go and attack. And when it goes to the virus infected cells, right? It's going to kill the virus-infected cells and your good cells. In fact, it releases neutrophils and T killer cells, and they just continuously get rid of your own cells. And so this is where the majority of like the symptoms are coming from COVID-19. It's actually your own immune system. It's your own immune response. So if you have a very strong immune response, this is what's going to happen. Eventually, your immune response kind of regulates everything, right? Everything gets regulated, and then you get better. So the majority of people do get better. However, especially people that are elderly, right? Their immune system never gets that control over the virus, and so they become a lot more. Basically, they become like sitting ducks for newer infections to occur, or for past, problems, like the other problems that they have to kind of manifest themselves more, and that's what ends up killing them in the end, right? Because basically your immune system is so focused on your, like wherever the COVID-19, like on your lungs, okay? They're so focused there that it's not really paying attention to any of the other stuff. You can kind of think about it that way. And so this is what actually leads to the death of like people with COVID-19. So it's more like these secondary pathogens or secondary like underlying conditions that a person already has that end up killing them. And either way, it's absolutely tragic, right? It's absolutely tragic. Even though, like, say a healthy individual like myself, even though that cough did not sound very healthy, guys. I was just choking. I was choking on something. I have no idea. Anyways, even though I could probably even be asymptomatic. So there's a lot of people that are asymptomatic that have the virus, and our immune systems are so amazing that just like it doesn't even harm us. But we can shed, like we can give. That sounds disgusting. We can shed, but we can give off the virus, right? We can still spread it in respiratory droplets. So what was I saying? Sorry. So even if I have it and I'm asymptomatic, or if I get it and my body fights it and I get better after a while, like that's not the point. The point is that there's other people like that are kind of like immunocompromised, elderly, they have other underlying symptoms and everything, and they are at risk. Those people are the ones that we're basically, by doing our part, like wearing masks and everything, and it's going to pretty much help that population of people, because they're the ones that are more susceptible and have, will probably die. Though there has been cases where, there's exceptions, because in microbiology, there's always exceptions, where there's a few people, like, even healthy teenagers that die or something like that. But that's why there's still a lot of investigation going into like COVID-19 and how it works. But it's a really strange time. I'm sure you guys agree with me. Everything has been like tossed into the air. It's horrible, like absolutely horrible, like people like losing their jobs and everything. But yeah, I feel like at least like there's a whole thing about like social distancing and everything that I'm not going to go into. But I feel like just a person being conscious of how they can like inhibit, like, or not inhibit, but lessen the spread. So even by using a mask as you go to the grocery stores or something like that, if you obviously can, like if you don't have an underlying thing like asthma, all right, it's just basically doing your part and not being selfish. That's how I see it. Again, some people may be really mad at me for this, so I'm sorry if this offended you guys. But it is hard. It is extremely hard. It's very hard, and I feel like the government and like other like nations in general have had to make some really tough decisions, very, very tough decisions. And it's amazing how a microbe can just really debilitate like the entire world and can bring it to its knees. Like, it's amazing. So that was my little rant. I'm gonna go get some water. Never mind, I don't want to get water. I actually didn't. I paused it, but I didn't get water because I just want to finish this because I've just been talking for too long. Oh, another thing I want to talk about. I didn't mention this, but there could be a lot of scarring also with COVID-19 that could lead to like permanent damage in your alveoli. So just FYI. Okay, I'm gonna stop. Respiratory syncytial virus, RSV, pretty much what you find in really young children and newborns, and it can be fatal to them. Okay, anyone can get it, but usually if you're an adult, you don't even feel it. Like your body can get rid of it, your immune system can respond to it very, very well. But for children and newborns, that like you don't really have that good of an immune system, it can be fatal to them. So it's the most common childhood respiratory disease in newborns and young children. In infants and the immunocompromised infants, it triggers fever, rhinorrhea, which is just a fancy way of saying runny nose, cyanosis, again, fancy way of saying that you turn blue because you have coughing, you have these coughing fits and you don't get enough oxygen, kind of like the whooping cough, right? And sometimes wheezing. This is a leading cause of bronchiolitis, the inflammation of the bronchioles, and pneumonia among children less than 2. So pneumonia, remember, that's like not viral, that's like going to be bacterial, so they can get pneumonia in addition to this, right? It's the leading respiratory killer of infants worldwide. In older children and adults that have a normal immune system, all we get is cold-like symptoms. We don't really get anything pretty much from it. We can get rid of it, no problem. Some children develop tracheobronchitis, which is basically your trachea and your bronchi where they're inflamed, and this is known as croup. What causes it is a respiratory syncytial virus. The virus it's called that because the virus causes syncytia, which are basically the cells that they infect. They actually force the cells to fuse. So as one cell, how many are there? There's 5 cells. These 5 cells can fuse to form one huge multi-nucleated cell, essentially, and it's known as a multi-nucleated syncytium. And then, this starts making more and more viruses. So this basically, it causes plugs of mucus and dead cells in the bronchioles, which leads to difficulties breathing. And then the immune response to the RSV, right? Because the immune response also goes ahead and tries to do something. It further damages the lungs as well. Transmission is via close contact with infected people, so kissing, touching, shaking hands, and also via fomites. Respiratory droplets, amazingly enough, it's a lot less common here. Who are more at risk? Any person who is immunocompromised, like even the elderly, but especially newborns and babies, like just infants and babies, they're very much at risk. So younger than 5, and this is prevalent in the United States. So to diagnose it, you basically look at the signs and symptoms for verification of the diagnosis. That is, you make an immunoassay. So actually for all of these kind of viral lower respiratory syndrome infections, you always want to figure out like the specific strain. So you do go ahead and do an immunoassay or like PCR or something that is like diagnostic to see what strain you're dealing with. Treatment, supportive treatment for young children. Prevention includes attempts to delay infection by aseptic technique, and especially in healthcare and daycare employees. So just taking the extra time to ensure safety of the kids. Moving on, hantavirus, oh my gosh. So hantavirus goes hand in hand with the leftist fear of mice. I am absolutely terrified of mice. Like I can't stand them. And in addition, their urine and their feces contains the hantavirus, okay, it doesn't always, okay, but it may contain the hantavirus, which is absolutely terrifying to me because this hantavirus, you can go ahead and pretend you have like a normal day and you have muscle aches as if like, when you go to the gym, right? And then the next day, you just have like soreness, muscle aches, muscle soreness. That's basically what it feels like, except that this thing can then kill, like, so you have that muscle soreness, which you can kind of think that, oh, it's because I went to the gym yesterday. But then this thing can outright kill you. So terrifying. Hantavirus has to do with mice. How can you guys remember that? Hanta mice. If you ever have a mouse, call him Hanta. That would actually be hilarious. Like, oh my gosh, that would be so funny. I would love that. Okay, hantavirus pulmonary syndrome. So signs and symptoms, you have fever, fatigue, muscle aches in the trunks and legs. So generally where you have muscle aches after you go to the gym, right? These symptoms progress to coughing, shock, and difficulties breathing as the lungs fill with fluid and you legit drown in your own fluid. So you drown, okay? So they drown in their own fluid. Despite even intensive care and medical care, 50% of the diagnosed people can die by drowning in their own fluids. Another thing that you can see is elevated white blood cell, like leukocyte counts, leukocyte counts and low platelet counts. The hantavirus is a genus of virus that infects species of mice. Transmission is via inhalation of dried mouse urine, feces, or saliva. I'm picturing a mouse tongue right now. Okay. From lungs, they enter like it enters blood and it travels throughout the body, infecting cells that make up blood capillary walls, especially in the lungs. The body responds with inflammation. Capillaries start leaking the fluids into the surrounding tissues, like in the lungs, and the blood pressure drops precipitously. So you have fluid buildup in the lungs, you have blood pressure dropping precipitously, which is going to lead to shock, and you're going to have death. So about 50% die from pneumonia and shock. Okay, there are several cases in the United States, apparently all west of the Mississippi River. This is enough to basically make Alessia never go there. Okay, sorry, I don't like mice at all. Like they give me the heebie-jeebies. Yeah, I have like a fear of mice. I actually don't know what that, you know how you have like arachnophobia. I wonder if there's a fear of mice, like if you have a fancy name for it. Probably. I never looked it up. So from mice, it's transmitted from mice, but you can't really transmit it from person to person, which is interesting because mice are the reservoir and we don't make enough of the virus to pass it on to actual humans. Diagnosis is based on disease manifestations and is confirmed with serologic or PCR assays. There's no specific treatment beyond intensive support care and no vaccine exists. So avoiding exposure to mice excrement is the best prevention, which I think is the most sound advice anyone could ever give you. Okay. And then we move on to other viral respiratory diseases because, why don't have even more? There's other ones, and these ones, again, they usually they cause diseases in children, elderly, and the immunocompromised. Because what they end up doing, most of these viruses, is they just debilitate you. They debilitate you so that other things can come in and cause problems. So the cytomegalovirus, the metapneumovirus, and the parainfluenza viruses as well. The metapneumovirus is actually the second most common cause of viral respiratory disease, and researchers have found that antibodies against the virus are present in all children by age 5. So that's how often you get it. Parainfluenza viruses, 3 strains cause croup. Remember that that when the trachea and the bronchi are infected in kids, and viral pneumonia, particularly in children. We don't have any specific antivirals or vaccines available. Frequent hand washing reduces the spread of virus, especially because the majority of these viruses are enveloped. And if you have enveloped viruses, you can get rid of you can basically compromise that lipid bilayer by using like soap, right? So that is it. I rambled on for ages about the COVID-19, guys. About COVID-19. I hope you guys learned something about COVID-19, or you probably already know everything because everyone's been doing so much research. But it's a big hot topic, right? And I don't know, it's very hard. I feel like there's no right or wrong, or there's only wrong that we can do, really. So it's just a nasty situation. I hope it gets better soon. Okay, see you guys in the next video. We're going to talk about mycoses.